You can write in an informal, a neutral, or a formal tone. This is lesson 28 in the Architecture of Grammar. My name is Léandre Larouche. I'm the author of the Architecture of Grammar and the founder of Trivium Writing. In this video, we're going to talk about the three different tones. In the last video, we've talked about the different audiences, and although tones have something to do with the audience, well, they're not the same thing. And so in this video, we're talking about the informal tone, the neutral tone, and the formal tone. Now, let me say something about the audiences that we've talked about in the last video. Most of the time, when it comes to a general audience, when you write something for a general audience, you're going to write either in the informal or the neutral tone. And the reason is that it's simply more appropriate. It's simply more interesting for that audience. And when you write for experts, it's typically more formal. But now let's talk about what exactly these tones are. The way that I like to explain this to students and clients is that it's essentially like the way you talk to people in different contexts. If you're talking to somebody at a bar while having a pint of beer, you're going to be informal. You're going to use, you're not necessarily going to be grammatically correct, although when you're writing, you still want to be grammatically correct. But for example, you'll be using things like I'm. You see the contraction here, that's informal. That's as opposed to I am. I am is a little more formal. It's a little, or at least it's neutral. Now, the other thing is that there is a type of verbs, we call them phrasal verbs, and they're basically made of two words. And for example, break down. Breakdown is a phrasal verb. And these verbs are a little more casual. They sound more casual. They're typically stronger. They're a little more shocking. And so we use them a lot when speaking, when writing in the informal tone. Now, the opposite of the informal tone is the formal tone, where we're talking to somebody that we respect. For example, it could be the judge, it could be an elder, but typically we're going to want to use I am. We're not going to use the contractions. For example, as I'm speaking right now, I'm using contractions. So I said we're not going to be using. This is informal. The way that I speak right now, that is not like the formal tone. I'm not being formal. Now, the other thing with the formal tone is you'll be wanting to be extremely clear and extremely precise. And so you'll want to be using connectors like however, nevertheless, moreover, furthermore. These are all connectors that you can use, and they sound formal. If you were to do this, and if you needed to say these things in the informal tone, you would more so be using conjunctions. So you would be using but, be using and, plus, all these different words. The other thing is there are rules in the English language, so-called rules. For example, that you shouldn't finish a sentence with a preposition. That is true in the formal tone. That's not true in the informal tone. In fact, it's very appropriate in the informal tone to end a sentence with a preposition. It depends on how you want to sound. Now, again, as I've said, informal is as if you're talking to somebody at the bar and you're friends. Now, the formal tone is if you are speaking to somebody for whom you have respect. You see, I said for whom you have respect, that you have respect for. You have respect for whom you have respect. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was learning English, I said to people that I was hanging out with, I pointed the umbrella. I said, to whom does this belong? And they laughed at me. Why? Because I was super formal. We're hanging out with friends. See, hanging out, that's a phrasal verb. It's very casual. In formal tone, we could say we're spending time. So we were hanging out, we were speaking informally, casually, and I said, to whom does this belong? This was weird. And so they laughed at me. So to whom does this belong? Whose is this? We're spending time, we're hanging out. Now neutral. Neutral is as if you were talking to somebody who've just met. And you're neither too formal, neither too casual. You're going to use contractions. You may use these, and you may start your sentences with these. Not necessarily use these. And it's essentially going to be quite neutral. It's going to be a bit of a mix. Now, the other thing, when you're thinking about informal, neutral, formal, informal tends to be short. It tends to be punchy. Your sentences will be short. You're using short words. And informal, which reminds us of the expert audience, it doesn't matter. You can use long sentences. You can use long words that have multiple syllables. You can do all these things, and you don't have to worry about the complexity. When it comes to neutral, it's a mix, and you want to make sure that you speak the way that you write the way that your audience wants you. So this one is not as rigid, but informal, it's very casual, it's very loose, and formal is very rigid. It's a lot, it's really writing. A lot of the time, if you look back at history, if you look at a lot of the books that we read, old books, these are all written in the formal style. Today in the modern world, we use the informal style a lot, but that is just how times have changed. Now go in the architecture of grammar, you're going to see different examples. You're going to see, in fact, one example written for these 3 different tones, and so you'll have a really clear idea of what is the difference between these 3 different tones. You'll also be prompted to write your own text, and so this way you can get the best practice possible. So go to your, open your copy of the Architecture of Grammar and do these, go through these exercises and check out the examples.